I was recently doing a little reading in Russell Dyke's book about Laurel County, and I stumbled across an article about the uh, Captain T.P. Caldwell and the 7th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry from the Civil War. Captain Caldwell, which is shown here in the middle, was the basically the leader of the 7th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry. And right here is my great great grandfather, who was a lieutenant in the 7th Kentucky. And the Dyke book contained a roster of men, and what became of most of them. And I was reading over here on this next page and ran across the name Edward Lear. Edward Lear died November 2nd, 1861, from a wound received at Wildcat, Kentucky. So, in other words, Edward Lear died at Camp Wildcat, at the Battle of Camp Wildcat, which, if you live here in Laurel County, you know where that is and what that's all about. And I'm not a big Civil War historian, but the name Edward Lear jumped off the pages at me, and I'm going to show you why.
This is Mount Pleasant Road, which turns left off of Highway 30, just past the sign on Highway 30 that says Atlanta. A lot of people notice the sign Atlanta. Years ago, there was a little small community, a little post office at Atlanta. And Mount Pleasant turns left off of 30, right just past the Atlanta sign as you're headed toward Jackson County. About 8 or 9/10 of a mile out the road, you come to Watkins Cemetery Road, right here. The Watkins Cemetery Road turns left up here, and there's a lane that goes up there to the Watkins Cemetery. I'll tell you about that in a minute. This lot right here, years ago, used to be the site of two things, really. This was the location of Mount Pleasant Church and Mount Pleasant one-room school, right here on the edge of the road. And the Watkins Cemetery is a modern cemetery at the end of this lane. What is slowly disappearing from time is another cemetery, the old Mount Pleasant Cemetery. Now, Watkins Cemetery is way up there at the end of this lane, and it's disappearing is along this hillside right here. There's a lot of deadfall in here where storms came through several years ago, and the old Mount Pleasant Cemetery is right here. According to the Historical Society documentation, there are over 100 graves that scatter this hillside. There are only 3 that have names on them and that are known. 2 of the 3 are at the top of that knoll right there. But that's not the story either, where Edward Lear is concerned. The rest of the story is just sort of a by chance encounter that I had here a few weeks ago. I was up here a few weeks ago, and I found the 2 graves that are marked at the top of the knoll, and then I started looking around further. Found an old set of steps right here that leads up to the old Mount Pleasant Cemetery. And you start looking around here in this area, and there are lots of graves scattered. You gotta look close. A lot of them are just sunken spots. There's one there, another one. I can see 4 or 5 right there in a row. And then you start looking further, and you start seeing old field stones. Graves. There's a grave there. There's an old stone there. There's an old stone there. But this tree right here had blown over, and a buddy of mine and I came down here because it was looming right over the top of 2 graves. Here's one, and here's the other. Now, I read in the book about Edward Lear, And here's where he's buried. Edward Lear, Company K of the 7th Kentucky Infantry. And that stone has been sort of unearthed and almost pulled out of the ground by this huge stump here. So it's kind of odd that, you know, found this and came back out with a buddy of mine, and we cut the log away from the top of it, and then get to reading about Edward, and he died from his injuries at Camp Wildcat. Fascinating story. It's hard to believe, really. There's another grave right there. It's hard to believe there are over 100 known, well, not known, but 100 burials scattered around this lot. I'm going to show you a map that shows the general location of the Watkins Cemetery, which is the modern cemetery right up over that hill and up the lane. And then I'll show you the comparative size of the old Mount Pleasant that is basically all around in this area right here. And then the site for the old schoolhouse and church house is right down there on the corner. I'll show you that map right here.
In this map, you can see the relative size between Watkins and Mount Pleasant. The W, of course, is Watkins, and the M is Mount Pleasant. The only thing that the map does not show is the little lane that runs between the two. Mount Pleasant is believed to have over 100 burials, where, as of 2023, Watkins contains about 55 burials.
So the once thriving community of Atlanta and the Mount Pleasant Church, Schoolhouse, and Mount Pleasant Cemetery have basically disappeared and are disappearing as the forest slowly takes this cemetery back over. But had it not been for just browsing around down here, might have never known where Edward Lear was buried. We got to come back out here and upright this stone here in the near future. Here's sunken spots that just are all around this area. When you start looking, they just start revealing themselves. There's one there, sort of lays right in there. And there's one right here, sort of in that shadow right there. You start seeing them when you step back away, but they're probably literally dotting this here hillside. And up on top of the knoll, there are two known graves of a mother and a daughter, and several old graves up there that actually have a little small wire fence around them. Here at the old Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is effectively fading from existence right off of Mount Pleasant Road.
Edward Lear joined the Volunteer Infantry September 21st of 1861. 30 days later, he was wounded, and he died 12 days after that at the age of 21.